Welcome to another episode of Live from the Blue Seats. I'm your host, Rob, joined this week by Dave and producer JL. Full lineup here as we're going to talk a little bit, preview the Four Nations final, which will be, if you're listening to this on Thursday morning, later tonight. So just a quick little bit on that, and then get back into the final sprint before the trading deadline on March 7th, and kind of just talk about where the Rangers stand, what they need to do to kind of solidify potentially a playoff spot, if we feel like they're going to actually do that, which way they should go with the trade deadline, all that good stuff. So, guys, good to be back with you after a couple of weeks hiatus here. Dave, how's everything in your world?
Well, good to have you back. I don't know how much more of, these me and JL only pods I was going to take. He's a little too young. He's never used Windows 3.1
That's a lie,
before.
Dave. That's a lie, Dave. That's
never on AOL 2.5 or 3.0.
Dave, that's a lie.
So...
I'm going to say that right now. That's a lie. I've used Windows 3.1 before. Hello, everybody. I wasn't going to hop in right there, but Dave had to call me out. But yeah.
No, I'm not. You're telling everybody, to be nice because I'm old and I'm, you know what? F that. I'm trying to actually not curse this time around. We'll see how long this goes.
We're keeping it truly family friendly. JL, hope all is well with you. How's everything hockey and otherwise for you?
Everything's good. I'm good. I'm smiling right now. I've been smiling a lot. Actually, it's funny, hockey related. My JT Miller jersey came in. I never thought in my life I'd actually buy one, because as much as I liked him back in the day, I always thought he was very under, not doing as well as he should have. But then I come to find myself buying a JT Miller jersey. I have another one coming in soon, but I'm doing good. I will be in Pittsburgh and Buffalo for the first two games. So I will see them up close to see whether or not they're a true playoff team. But I'm good. And it's nice to have you back, Rob. Your voice is always welcome, and it always makes me feel very cool and wondering why I don't sound like that.
Oh, well, I appreciate that. Very kind words from you. Your voice isn't bad. I think this is overall a good sounding pod. We try at least. So listen, let's do just a quick few minutes on the Four Nations. Obviously, the final is Thursday night in Boston, USA versus Canada. It's what everybody wanted. It's two teams that, clearly the two best teams in the tournament, although I think Finland acquitted themselves well. Sweden was a bit of a disappointment. I think, I haven't had the chance to watch every single game front to back. I did see most of USA Canada, although the way bedtime with the kids lined up, I actually missed all the fights. So I had to go back and rewatch the chaos. Was also equal parts excited, but also terrified that JT Miller would get hurt in his fight. So I'm glad he came out of it okay. But yeah, I mean, look, I think just my initial thought, and then I'll get your guys' reactions as well. Great job by the NHL. Everybody else is kind of talking about, and all the other kind of sports leagues are, the All-Star break and the All-Star festivities are a major sticking point and concern for all these leagues. They just don't know how to treat them anymore, with ratings in decline and people not impressed by the usual stuff, whether it's the game or the associated, like in the NBA, 3-point contest and dunk contest. With the NHL, even the skills competition, which I think a lot of folks generally enjoy, was getting a little bit stale. And they tried certain things to with the game formats to make those more interesting. Nothing was working. The players don't like it. They try to ask out of it. The fans don't like it. The ratings are bad, et cetera, et cetera. This has been a huge hit. I mean, massive ratings. The games have been awesome. And it seems like there really is an appetite for international hockey. And I can just tell you guys, anecdotally, a lot of people in my life that aren't hockey fans are into this, and they are going to watch on Thursday night. You got a lot of people in the mainstream media, ESPN types that don't normally talk hockey are talking about this. So honestly, the NHL did a great job, and I think this is a great stepping stone to get back into the Olympics and hopefully keep international hockey on the calendar long term. So, JL, I'll start with
How
you.
are they going to screw it up? How is how is
there you
Gary
go.
Bettman going to screw this up? Because
It's
all
so
three
true.
of us know this is they're gonna do something that screws this up. What are they gonna do?
Well, we'll just have to wait and see then, I guess. But just I was actually thinking about that, Dave. Now that you've kind of I before you said that, I actually thought about that. But just to touch on what Rob said about just the whole tournament, I actually got a chance to watch probably 98% of the tournament. And I guess just in a quick summation, this tournament was built for USA Canada, obviously. Only four nations. This was we knew it was going to be USA Canada. It was inevitable. Finland, very surprising considering the depth that they lost on defense, actually were able to really take it to Sweden and actually hold up their own against Canada. And then, like you said, Sweden was also kind of a disappointment. You had they were very heavy in terms of star power, but you could tell they just could never get it together. Elias Pettersson wasn't great. Mika Zibanejad was actually really good.
He was pretty good in what I saw. I agree with that too.
No,
his game looks like it's back moving in the right direction and close to what we expect of him for sure.
Right. So that's definitely an encouraging sign. But you look at Elias Pettersson wasn't good. Victor Hedman was a lot of the guys, they just kind of flamed out. Jesper Bratt was okay. They looked okay against Team USA, but Team USA had like 4 or 5 players out. But USA coming out hot. I watched that game. I made it a point to be home watching that game. I didn't want to miss it. And when I tell you, I had never wanted to run outside with an American flag with a bald eagle cap more than I did when those fights happened. And look, you can say what you want about what you believe, what's going on in the country, politically, societally, whatever. At the end of the day, even though I disagree with a lot that's going on in our country, I'm still very proud to be an American. And when I see a USA do well, I become very patriotic. Not in the obvious way that most people might think. I just love my country, and it was nice to see a bunch of American hockey players kind of take it to Canada a little bit. So that was really nice, especially with hockey being such a competitive sport and very fiery. And you got basically the Bash brothers and the two Kachucks, and then JT Miller fighting a guy that's like maybe 3 inches, 4 inches bigger than him. Little concerning, but it was nice to see that fire. And you mention it when it comes to people wanting international hockey. Now, if you look at the next couple of years, you have the Olympics, which are next year, and then you'll have the World Cup of Hockey, and it'll repeat itself every 2 years. So you're going to have something like this every so often.
Mm-hmm.
Just to touch on what Dave said, how will the NHL screw this up? It's almost impossible, but you never know. But in the meantime, they've set themselves up for what could potentially be eye-opening exposure over the next couple of years, because these guys will always go balls to the wall for their country. And
yeah,
I thought it was great, and I can't wait for the final. I will be in transit. I will be on my way in an airport, but I will be watching. I will be paying close attention. I'm psyched. I thought this is a phenomenal tournament. You couldn't have asked for anything better. I got tired of the old All-Star stuff. The NBA looked like total fools this weekend, digging out Mac
McClung.
basically from the depths of obscurity. And meanwhile, we've got a bunch of dudes throwing it down for a game that ultimately doesn't mean anything in a couple of months. Says a lot.
Yeah, Dave, I think to your point too, and I'll get your thoughts on this and then we'll do predictions and move on. But to what JL just said about how you have the Olympics next year, then a World Cup in 2028. I think what the NHL could potentially do is oversaturate, right? Try to shoehorn some sort of international tournament into every single season and basically overdo it the way they've kind of overdone it with the outdoor games. That would be my thought. I think if you kind of establish that every 2-year cadence, you create demand for this. You should add some countries, obviously, because certainly, Russia should be in, Czechia should be in, You can make an argument for Germany. You can make an argument for France. Obviously the teams you'd expect to be in Olympic competition that we'll see in next year anyway. But I think that would probably be it, right? It would be like kind of the oversaturation point.
So I haven't been able to watch as much as you guys, and it's not by choice. It's just the timing of everything with I was away for the weekend, things like that. So I haven't been able to watch. But to your point, they do need to create a need for it, and having it every year is overkill.
Mm-hmm.
So I do like the return of the World Cup of hockey. I do, you have the Olympics. I don't think you need more than that. But if they're going to redo the 4 nations at some point, I think you do 6 nations. You add Russia and a rest of the world team. And the round robin becomes top 4, make it to a single elimination tournament.
Mm-hmm. There'd be more games.
More games, more players. I think that would be a fun way of doing it. But I understand why Russia's not in it. Like you guys said, this was geared to get USA Canada involved. And, USA Canada have some kind of showdown. But I liked what I've heard about, to tie to the Rangers, Urho Vakanainen, and how he's looked for Finland in particular.
Mm-hmm.
Apparently, he was their best defenseman, and that's good.
100%.
Yes, he was really good. And I will say that the only other Ranger that's really stood out to me has been, well, I should say, both Trocheck and Miller, I think, have been solid, but Miller has, I think, had a very good Canada game too. And when Matthew Tkachuk left that game with a lower body injury, it sounds like he'll play in the final, but JT Miller took his spot on the top line. So he was playing with Eichel and Brady Tkachuk. Hasn't scored in the tournament or anything, but has been really, really good. And then obviously, Mike Sullivan's really leaning on Trocheck for heavy defensive deployment, and he's been good defensively, which, as we've talked about a lot, hasn't always been the case with the Rangers, maybe due to the fact that, Panarin and Lafreniere, his normal line mates, aren't the most adept back checkers. So real quick, and then we'll move on. JL first, what's your prediction for the final?
USA 3-2. USA.
Dave, any prediction?
5-1.
Wow.
USA.
So here, I hate to do this, but I'm picking Canada in overtime. I just think it's going to be hard to beat that team twice. I think it's going to be an epic game. And I'm hoping to be wrong here. Maybe I'm doing a little bit of, reverse jinxing with my heart or something. But I just...
This is the Olympics all over again.
Exactly. Yeah.
If it's a Crosby golden goal, I'm going to drive to your new house and slap you.
Yes, and I will deserve that. So, all right. So let's move on to the Rangers. They have 7 games between now and the return of the NHL this weekend, and the trading deadline on March 7th. So I'm just going to read those games to you, and where I want to start is, and let's also relook at the standings before we do that, right? So the Rangers currently sit 3 points out of a playoff spot. They are in 5th, or I guess the 3rd spot out of the 2 wild cards. So you have the top 2, and then ahead of them are the top 2 are Ottawa and Detroit, 62 and 61 respectively. Columbus and Boston, 60 points. Rangers 58. Rangers have games in hand on Boston, two on Boston, 1 on Columbus, same amount of games played as Detroit, 1 game in hand on Ottawa. I know that's a lot to keep track of, but all that is to say, with 27 games left, the Rangers are 3 points out of a playoff spot. And, most models you look at has them anywhere between a 40 to 55% chance, or 40 to 50% chance, let's call it, of making the playoffs. And then schedule wise, like I said, they have 7 games remaining between now and the trading deadline. And I'm just going to read them off quickly. At Buffalo, Saturday. At Pittsburgh, Sunday. JL will be at both. At on the island, Tuesday, February 25th. Home for Toronto on February 28th. Sorry, let me load up the next page of their lovely calendar schedule here. Home
You're on
against
Yahoo, aren't you?
No, it's actually the Rangers website, which, does anyone go to a hockey team's website anymore? Probably not. Home Sunday, March 2nd against Nashville. Another back-to-back March 3rd against the Islanders at home. And then March 5th is the last game before the deadline at home against the Washington Capitals. So It's not the hardest schedule. Obviously, the two most difficult games there are against the
Toronto and
Capitals
Washington.
and Toronto, right? And they're both at home. So, other than that, this is mostly winnable games. 2 against the Islanders, too, who they are still battling for playoff positioning. So, Dave, what do you make of that slate of games? And what do you think the Rangers have to do record-wise to maybe get into a playoff spot, right? Be in one of those 2 wildcard spots by the trade deadline?
I mean, we'll know after this weekend if they're actually going to make a run. If they lose even one of these games against Pittsburgh or Buffalo, they're done. I don't see them having the mental fortitude to put it together and make a run and give Chris Drury and Peter Laviolette a reason to buy at the deadline. And that's the key thing. It's not the 27 games, it's the 7.
Mm-hmm.
They have to have a reason to buy. They have to give the front office a reason to believe in them. And they haven't done that. And they were doing that in January. And then they went and had whatever the hell that was. I can say hell and still make this family friendly, right?
Yes, that's fine.
Good. So whatever the hell that was against Pittsburgh without Malkin or Crosby, and they still lost in regulation, and they didn't even get goal lead. So whatever that was the game that I said, okay, maybe it was just a blip that they looked good in January. They have to win these 2 games over the weekend, period. If they lose, even if they lose in overtime or in a shootout, that's not good enough. You need 4 points. And then you need to beat the Islanders too. I think you have to win all 3, but the weekend is the biggest.
Yeah, and it's tough back-to-back with travel. 5:30 start on Saturday, 3:30 start on Sunday. So, JL, you'll be feeling that travel fatigue too.
Yeah, but Buffalo and Pittsburgh are like, what?
That's true.
2.5 hours.
Yeah, that's nothing.
That's true. Yeah. No, that's true. But I'm just looking at this as like a 7-game chunk where like I do want, if they can win 5 out of 7,
Yes.
that's 10 points. That's probably going to put them roughly in a tie for one of the 2 wildcard spots. But at that point, like you were saying, Dave, like I don't know that you're certainly not going to be, unless they win 7 in a row, right? Then maybe you say, okay, let's aggressively buy. We can maybe like push a chip into the middle of the table. I don't think there's any scenario where they're pushing all the chips into the middle of the table and like going to get the number 1 guy in the market. And like, it just doesn't, this seems like, as we've talked about a lot and has been written about a lot everywhere about this team, like this is, for better or worse, a transitional year. Now, I think they can still make something of it. And if they do get into the playoffs, I think they're dangerous, but they are remaking the core on the fly here and trying to be competitive, right? As opposed to going full scale rebuild. So I think that's pretty clear. But JL, what are your thoughts going into this weekend?
I definitely agree to some point that they definitely need to do something about Friday and Saturday. Pittsburgh, whether Crosby's playing or not, they need to win. I think that Pittsburgh game is probably the most important one. You could say it's the Buffalo game, but for the most part, they probably will win. They probably will win that one. But I think the Pittsburgh game is probably the most important because, at least in this aspect, because that sets the tone for the next 2. Because then, forbid something will always happen against the Islanders. You guys know that just as good as I do. And then you face Toronto. So you need to beat Pittsburgh in order to kind of get that momentum going. Now, if they lose against Buffalo, well, tough. That's going to suck. But it's vital. Now, I think they will win both those games. Obviously, I'm not just saying that because I'm going to be there, but just looking at both those teams, and you talk about that game at MSG, they were all out of sorts. I was at that game too. Just looking at them on the ice, you could tell they were all like out of sorts. Laviolette was like moving lines. Everyone was a bit sluggish. It was weird because they weren't terrible that night, but it just wasn't enough. Just kind of sluggish here and there. Hopefully the 2 weeks off has given them a little bit of life, outside of the guys that were playing, but in the 4 nations. But I think even with Crosby and Malkin on the ice, I think they could still beat them. So Up until the deadline, I think what they need to do, honestly, at this point, even if they don't win every single game, but win a decent amount, you have to find a way to replace Ryan Lindgren. And I'm not trying to call anybody out, but if you really want to be serious about this, if you're Chris Drury, you have to find a way to give Adam Fox a good defenseman. And again, referencing the Four Nations, look at how Fox played with, was it Slavin? It was phenomenal. I mean, granted, Fox wasn't lighting up the scoreboard, but you can see what happens when Fox plays with a competent defenseman. Now, ideally, you'd want that guy to be K'Andre Miller, but Miller's having way too much success with Borgen to kind of move that. So there has to be somebody you can throw there, whether you throw Vakanainen in there or Schneider or
Well, I
you
was going to
throw Zach
say,
Jones, maybe.
not to cut you
That
off,
ship
Dale,
has
but
sailed with Jones. Ship has sailed with Jones.
it's not Jones. I would say Vakanainen seems like a good fit. And again, you referenced the Four Nations, but he was Finland's best defenseman. You know, I think he had, you know, because Money Puck was tracking all the advanced metrics during those games. I think he was over 50% expected goals in the game against Canada. I think he was actually maybe over 50% expected goals against the US, even in a game that they lost 6-1 or whatever the final score was. So he's been a positive, net positive for, you know, a national team, which is, you know, the best players from his country. And there's a lot of great Finnish players in the NHL. And he is the exact style that I think perfectly complements Fox, right? He's a stay-at-home guy that plays a defensive game and is somewhat physical, but he's also not like a traditional bruiser. But he can move the puck. And, you know, I think that would sort of free Fox up to really, you know, maximize his skill because, look, it's very clear to me that he just, you know, and he's having a good year. And I think, like, if you look at, again, some of the underlying numbers and like the, you know, Dom Luszczyszyn's, I think that's how you say his name, from The Athletic, like his net rating, metrics, like they still have Fox ranked extremely high, like in the 96th percentile for defensemen in the NHL. But I still think it's fair to say he's having a slightly down year by his very lofty standards. So, and I think a lot of that's due to Lindgren, and we've beat that, you know, horse well near to death here, as most people have across a lot of other places as well. But point being that I would have no problem trying Vakanainen there in that spot, and then, you know, seeing what you could do, acquiring some depth on the left side, and then maybe making a bigger move for a proper top, number one left-handed defenseman in the offseason. But Dave, I know you had some thoughts about that I think you wrote about him on the Patreon post.
Yep. So I don't want to get into the habit of reciting the entire, you know, Patreon post on the podcast.
People pay for that. People pay for that. That is valuable content.
So I'll recite what I put on Blue Sky instead, which was a little teaser to it. And essentially, my feelings on the trade deadline actually have nothing to do with the way the Rangers play over the next 7 games. For the most part. Yes, they need to win games, because if they lose the first 3 games, they're going to sell. We know that. But even if they win 7, they win all 7 games before the trade deadline, they're still not good enough to go all in and sacrifice pieces like Othman or Perreault and go for it. Unless there's a true left defenseman, 1LD, available. That is the only thing the Rangers should be focusing on right now at the trade deadline. Is there a franchise-altering... You don't even need a franchise-altering left defenseman. You need somebody who can play with Fox and let Fox do his thing.
Yeah, long-term.
Yes, and it's got to be long-term. So long-term can mean a couple of different things. If the price for Jake Wallman is reasonable, emphasis on reasonable, he would be the guy I would go to for a rental, because he's this year and next year, and he bridges the gap to whatever the Rangers can do. Everybody loves Brady Tkachuk. He's not what they need. They need somebody who is not Ryan Lindgren. Lindgren is basically like plugging an Atari 2600 into an 80-inch OLED TV at this point. You can't do it anymore. It's done. That ship has sailed. Get rid of him. I feel bad because I love the guy, but you have to get rid of him. You need the left defenseman first. There is no point in getting a 3C, assuming Zibanejad winds up on as a winger. No point in getting a 3C if you don't get a defenseman to replace Ryan Lindgren. There's no point in getting depth if you don't get a defenseman to replace Ryan Lindgren. There is no point in doing anything if you don't get rid of Ryan Lindgren. He is the weakest link, and he has to go. And I feel bad saying this because he has given everything to this team, but I have long gone past the player attachment phase of this. I want the Rangers to win a Stanley Cup, and they can't do it with Ryan Lindgren. Period. End of story. If they can't get a replacement, there is no point in doing anything at the deadline other than selling. And my watch just gave me a standing hour while I'm sitting here waving my arm around talking about this. It gave me I'm sitting in my chair. My watch gave me a standing hour for that.
Well earned. Yeah, look, I mean, I think I don't think there are many people who would disagree with you on that. I don't think there's been any signs in his game that it's going to rebound. I think that there was maybe a little bit of hope earlier in the year that, okay, he's coming back from a broken jaw, hasn't eaten solid food, whatever it might be, might have come back too early, was adjusting to playing with the full face shield, like all that stuff. And it's just, even fully healthy, coming off a 2-week break now, like I would not expect much from him. And they should be exploring things like Vakanainen in that spot, or trying Fox and Miller with a little bit more consistency, even though, to your point, JL, that's worked with Will Borgen. You could also put Vakanainen with Borgen, right? And roll with that as kind of a second pair, again, off of a very strong Four Nations tournament by Vakanainen. So, yeah, I mean, look, my thought on this is almost no matter what, because I agree with you, Dave, even if they win 7 in a row, I'm kind of like, okay, like that would be nice. It probably moves them into like the 60 to 70% ballpark of making the playoffs, which would be great. And I want them to make the playoffs. I think, there is truly like that element of like, you have Igor Shesterkin, anything can happen in a playoff run with that type of goaltending. So I want as many kicks at a playoff can as I can get. But what they need to do really at this deadline is a combination of buying and selling. It has to be, I think you have to probably move on from Lindgren. You probably should move on from Riley Smith. You probably should see, what you can get for, anybody else that's on kind of a short-term or manageable expiring contract. And then if there is a bigger sort of like hockey-ish trade to be made, then you look at that possibility as well. But like, certainly, and I'd be willing to sacrifice a low round pick or a B level prospect for some sort of depth addition that might be here on a reasonable number for this season and next, right? Like if there's a piece out there that fits on a third line, right, almost as like a Riley Smith replacement that you can get for a low cost, maybe you explore doing something like that. But there's just no point in going, big game hunting at this trade deadline, given where you sit in the standings.
And the one thing I want to be very clear on is it has to be in a very specific order that they do these things, no matter what approach they take. If they're doing a buying and a selling and trying to basically sell the UFAs, they have to get a defenseman. If they really want to try to buy for this season, they need a defenseman.
Mm-hmm.
There's no point in buying anybody else. This is an odd like if you hear the words that are coming out of our mouths, it's a very odd conversation, buying and selling people. But
hey, you said it, not us.
Yeah.
That's true though.
You need the defenseman. Like there is no point in getting a center, getting another winger. There's no point in buying and spending more assets for this season or even next season if you're just going to run it back with Lindgren. You need the defenseman. They don't have anybody in the pipe right now. They've already burned the bridge with Zach Jones, and they have the simplest thing they should be doing, which is firing Lindgren into the sun and playing Zach Jones, but they won't do it.
Yeah.
Sorry,
That is,
I'm very frustrated with the
no,
way they've handled this season.
well,
This
and
is this is the main reason why they are where they are right now. You can say anything you want about Trouba and Goodrow. That's crap.
well, it's also the script.
They don't have a roster that can compete because they can't get past their weakest link. They can't be more than the sum of their parts when they have one of the worst defensemen in the NHL playing 20 minutes a night.
It's also the script for this franchise where they have tended to overvalue and hang on to for too long this type of defenseman, and it goes back to Dan Girardi and Mark Stahl. Like this is a well-worn path, but the Rangers have. It's been a bit of an organizational blind spot that no matter who the executives are in the front office, it has not been something that they've been able to address. Now, I will give Drury a little bit of a break on this because I remember, I want to say it was 2 seasons ago. So Gallant was still the coach, which might have something to do with it as well. They did the Athletic did an article about kind of who the best shutdown defensemen in the NHL were. And again, it was one of those, data driven articles. And they were talking about, from an advanced metrics standpoint, it wasn't just who blocks the most shots and plays the most minutes. Lindgren was kind of in like the second or third tier. So he wasn't considered like Jacob Slavin or, that ilk, but he was in the second or third tier. He had very solid numbers. I remember, talking to you guys on the podcast about like, hey, Lindgren can hold his own even without Fox. Fox, when he was injured, Lindgren had some stints where he put up decent numbers and had decent on ice results. So like, it's not like he's been a train wreck for years the way Stahl and Girardi were. This is a relatively new thing where he's just clearly broken down. Combination of that plus the system, I think, Dave, which, you've talked about and other folks have highlighted, like, it might just be the wrong system for him. There's a lot of responsibilities on the left defenseman in the system, whether it's 1-3-1 and covering a lot of ice on neutral zone forecheck and entries. And then in zone, look, he's undersized. He plays a physical game, but he's undersized. And even though the league has gotten a lot faster, size still does matter. So I think that I will at least give Drury a little bit of a break on that because Lindgren, this has kind of been like an overnight decline as opposed to something we've all seen coming for 3 seasons. But I don't know if you guys agree with that or not. JL, I don't know if you have thoughts on that.
I think it's just kind of happened over time because it wasn't something immediate. It's something just happened where he was not the same anymore, and I think it's when Dave pointed it out about two seasons ago or seasons ago when he basically started to point out his decline. And then you start to see it on the ice, just kind of his presence wasn't as, I don't want to say menacing, but just more, it didn't complement Fox well anymore. And, you just really begin to see, just like, again, you referenced Mark Stahl, Dan Girardi. They would have honestly been better off if they had just decided to keep Anton Stralman at the time, because Stralman ended up basically went from being a somewhat offensive defenseman to essentially a solid 2-way depth defenseman in the league with 2 successful teams in Tampa and Florida. So the good thing here, though, I will say, though, is that the lack of a long-term deal for him kind of shows that the Rangers are not too keen on keeping him around, because then you have the potential arrival of Drew Fortescue at some point. But then down the line, obviously EJ Emery, obviously also with essentially the resurgence of K'Andre Miller with Will Borgen, it allows for greater flexibility in trying to find someone for Fox, and defensemen are going to come and go over the next year and change, so that, without being tied down to him, allows you to essentially fix that. In terms of the season, though, unless something drastic changes, and I hate to say this, I don't think the Rangers are going to trade Lindgren as much as we want them to, as much as I think they should. And I agree with you guys on that point. Just going off of how delicate the locker room is and the team's still playing relatively okay now. It may not seem like they want to mess with that balance in terms of trying to maybe throw off whatever dynamic that they have. So unless the trade is something that is really catastrophic to the point where they get someone who can, just take over on a whim, I don't think Lindgren's going anywhere. So I think we just might have to. And honestly, I don't think anyone wants him at the same time for, assets. I think Lindgren will be wanted by teams, but he'll just more than likely be a signing. I still have this feeling he's going to go to Anaheim, and he'll just kind of be a guy in the NHL. But I don't think the Rangers will trade him on the deadline. And it's a shame because, as Dave pointed out, and rightly so, and obviously you too, Rob, is that Lindgren is the odd man out. And you can clearly see it hurting the Rangers. And Adam Fox is having that type of season where he can't do it by himself.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just we're at that point with Fox where I'm not going to trade him, but he's clearly not having the year that he's supposed to. Whether that is his knee still being sort of compromised, or he's got a mental thing going on, or he's just underperforming. Could just be just only that. But clearly he's not been the same. In the past, he's been able to kind of cover up a lot of what Lindgren's been able to muck up. But this time around, he can't. So, I just, the only difference I'll say, unless they sign him to like a 5-year deal in the offseason, is I think they know. I just think they're having trouble moving the asset because, I mean, they went and moved heaven and earth to get rid of Goodrow, to get rid of Kakko, to get rid of Trouba. They can do it with Lindgren. I just don't think they have the right, the right deal in place for him.
Dave, do you think there's a market at this deadline for Ryan Lindgren?
Of course. 200 hockey men.
Never fails.
I'll always go back to that. I don't even know where that came from, the 200 hockey men. I forgot where that came from, but I'll always go back to it. Ryan Lindgren will have takers. He may not get a first round. I mean, he's not going to get a first round pick, but the Rangers, as of right now, this draft they don't pick until the 3rd round. If you look at all their pending unrestricted free agents, I think Lindgren can fetch a second. I think Riley Smith, who is having a quietly solid year, can fetch a second.
Mm-hmm.
And the Rangers can retain salary on all of them. They have 0 retained salary trades right now where they're retaining money. Pittsburgh is retaining on Riley Smith. So I don't think that counts towards their 3.
No, it does not.
So you get a playoff team that is looking for, let's look at Dallas for example. Dallas has 88 injuries on their blue line right now, and they need somebody. They need a temporary body. Lindgren would probably be fine there. Edmonton is always another one there. He's familiar. What's his face? Coach, help me out. Knobloch is familiar with Lindgren.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't be shocked if that's something they look at for a 2nd round pick, or like a 3rd and a 5th, or again, looking at their picks in 2026, maybe a 2026 second, or something where they kick the can down the road a little bit. There are going to be takers for Lindgren, and I think we always underestimate what these players get. I mean, Trouba fetched Vakanainen and a 4th. Trouba fetched a valuable piece.
Yeah, it's true. It's true.
And let's not forget that. If Trouba can get a second, Lindgren can get. If Trouba can get a valuable piece and a 4th, Lindgren can get a 2nd round pick.
Yeah, well, it'll be interesting. All right, let's go to the questions. Let's see what we got out there, and we'll I think you said we had 2, JL.
Yes. So we have, let's see how many we have on Twitter. Okay. So first question, this is the one on Twitter. This comes from Kevin at Spozo211.
Love Spozo.
And he says 3C and a 1 lefty are the need. If they are in a wild card spot at the deadline, does Drury make the moves to fill those holes? And should he? Well, we just also touched on that. So, but I guess we could reiterate that again.
Yeah, I mean, I would say. Sorry, wait. Was the first part of the question that they're in a playoff spot?
If they are in a wild card spot at the deadline, does Drury make the moves to fill those holes? And the follow up is, should he?
Ooh, that's a good one. I like that.
So I'm gonna say I'll split the, I hate this term, but I'll split the baby.
Split the baby. What
You
the
look it up. It's a real thing. People say it.
what? I have
Is that-
I'm gonna be 41 years old in a month. Shut up, JL. I have never heard that before.
Google
Well, I
it.
think
It
I'm
exists.
Googling it right now.
I think I might know where that term comes from. I think that
It's
might
an
be
idiom that means compromise in a way that disadvantages both sides. It's often used in legal context.
There you
The
go.
phrase comes from the biblical story of
I was just about to
King
say that.
Solomon, who ordered the division of an infant in two to what the
Yes.
what is
Gotta love-
what? How
Gotta
is
love
that?
scripture.
They,
Well,
the Bible said to cut a baby in half.
No. The reason of the story was to point out the absurdity of the situation. They weren't going to actually split a baby.
Okay, thank you. Somebody who actually understands what the Bible's trying to say. Tell me, because
Yeah.
I'm reading that and I'm taking it literally.
You never know. It's not a literal thing. It was a very on the nose remark in the Bible.
Oh, so the Bible shouldn't be taken literally, huh? Look at that. Sorry.
Well, Dave.
Sorry, couldn't help myself.
Okay, back to the question.
So yeah, I was gonna say he will fill one spot of the two. I think he will get a 3C. And I think they'll keep yeah. And I know this is exactly what you're saying, Dave. And I think they'll kind of stay status quo on defense. And he shouldn't do that. I think but I will say, like, there's always going to be, if they're in a wild card spot, that means they've played really well over the course of those 7 games, which is why we've kind of focused so much on that, right? If they go 7-0 or 6-1, imagine how good the fans are going to be feeling, the players are going to be feeling. JT Miller is going to be that much more, integrated into everything. They probably will have settled on something like final line combinations, because this is the time of year when that happens, and everybody will be looking at it like, all right, well, now we're going to play Washington. And yeah, this is something that sidebar, Dave, but like how you were talking about Washington being one of, and they're in first place. They have the most points in the league, but honestly, if they were the first round playoff matchup, like, I don't hate the Rangers' chances in that series. That's a young team. They would not have the best skater in the series. The Rangers have the better goalie. There's a lot of advantages there. And I think Washington, feels like a team that's ripe for an early exit, regardless of who they play first or second round. That aside, I think we're going to see some sort of halfway house here from the Rangers, because it just, I can't see them full selling, especially if they're in a wild card spot. There's going to be too many good vibes, whether or not they're a mirage or not.
I concur. I don't have any other thoughts on that.
So I'm going to play not devil's advocate, but the blockbuster seeker here.
Oh, wow.
Okay.
Let's assume that everything we've heard so far about what Drury wants to do with the team is true. Kreider is going to be traded. Zibanejad is going to be traded, and Panarin is going to be traded. Zibanejad would have to be at the draft. So let's focus on Kreider and Panarin. I put this in the group chat on the other site. I'm trying to think of a good name for that other site, but I can't call it that anymore. Panarin and Kreider can almost single-handedly address everything the Rangers need without really catching myself. With Kreider, without really losing much in terms of the lineup, because Will Cooley can pretty much, in my opinion, slide right in. And you miss some of Kreider's matchup issues where, that speed, size, strength, and net front presence is difficult to match up against. But Cooley, I think, can match at least the even strength production.
Mm-hmm.
You do Kreider. I floated, Kreider and Keandre Miller for Cal Ritchie and Sam Girard in Colorado. I think you can sub in Panarin for Kreider, and same thing applies. I don't know if that's even a viable fair value trade. It was just something stupid that I thought of. I think they wind up doing something like that. And I'm looking at Utah, and I'm looking at somebody like Clayton Keller.
They've wanted him forever.
They've wanted him forever. I'm looking at somebody potentially like John Marino. I'm assuming they're not going to trade Sean Dursey. I think there's a way to get a blockbuster hockey trade that gets the Rangers younger, that addresses needs, and fills out the roster the way Drury wants it to be. And something to consider regarding that, the Rangers have, 3 European skaters now on the roster? 4? They have Panarin, they have Zibanejad, they have Edstrom, and Vakanainen. Those are the only Euro skaters left on the Rangers. I don't think that's an accident.
Yeah, I don't know.
I don't think that's an accident. And this goes along the lines of everything we've heard about Chris Drury from when he got to the Rangers as the GM. Everything with the Kravtsov thing and having picking my words carefully here, a preference for North American hockey.
Which is weird because the team itself, even before he came, I feel like they preferred European skaters more, but I guess that philosophy kind of changed a little bit.
It's
Also, the Rangers aren't trading Lafreniere for what was Zegras straight up. What was
that's
that?
That's not. Yeah, that was
that's
Larry
not,
Brooks.
that's not happening. That was not happening.
No.
So to answer the question, Spozo, sorry, I think yes, they do it, and yes, they should, because I don't think they're going to go the traditional buying route that we're used to.
Okay.
Agreed.
Great.
All right. Next question.
All right. This next question is on Blue Sky. This comes from Ed Rasso. Let me just pull it up real quick. And he says, did that goal by Kreider in front of all the league GMs, the goal that he scored at the Four Nations, and traded to a cup hopeful?
So I have an interesting point about that. I think it's possible, yes, that folks saw that and thought, hey, this is a big game player popping up in a big game, which is a real thing. I don't want to minimize that. But I was reading a book it's called Soccernomics. It was about, global soccer and kind of like the way that it has evolved. I mean, it's, the biggest, most popular sport in the world. And, it's kind of like essentially think of Moneyball, but for soccer, focusing on kind of like the global stars and the European club scene and all that. And one of the things that sort of central tenets of the book was that one of the biggest mistakes you can make if you're building a soccer team is to pay a player a huge contract based on his performance in the World Cup. Now everybody thinks like, oh, it's the World Cup. It's the best players. It's the most significant event. There's numerous examples of guys getting these massive contracts because they had a big World Cup. And like the World Cup is 5 games, you play, or 6 games at max. If you make it to the final, you're playing for your national team. Those teams are not together very much. It's basically not a good representation of who you actually are as a player, technically, tactically, because the style of game is different, the role, all that stuff. So it's kind of the same principle here where it's like, I do think that's possible, but also like, I think it would be a mistake to be like, oh yeah, let's up our offer for an aging player because he had a really good showing at the Four Nations. So that just made me think of that. But look, I still think Kreider has a ton of value to a true contender. The open question right now is if the Rangers are a true contender. I think we agree they aren't right now, but could they be next year? And could he still be a factor? Yes. But also, if you're blown away by a trade offer for a guy at his age, with his contract status, you probably have to explore it.
I don't disagree. I still think he has a role here. I still think he can be a valuable contributor to a degree. His contract's going to look really good when the cap goes up, so they're not hamstrung by it. But like you said, at the same time, if a good deal comes their way, they can't say no, especially if a team is willing to maybe overpay a little bit. You know, for the future health of this team over the next few years, you want to get younger, you want to get quicker. And it's kind of odd to say when it comes relative to Kreider because he's still pretty fast in his own right. But at the same time, you have to look at the health of the team, look at possibly utilizing that spot for, another, kid coming up in the system that could potentially do a little bit more.
Mhm.
And, it's just one of those things with Kreider. You can basically go both ways. You can keep him, or you can basically find a way to utilize him still and, still be reasonably successful. So, but did that trade possibly, you're playing in front of close to millions of people and all the GMs are paying attention. Oh, somebody had to have noticed, but it all depends on what they're willing to give for it.
I don't think it changed anything. I think people knew what Kreider was, and they're willing, based off the body of work that he's put in, to say this year the Rangers are just a total tire fire, and he's been playing with back spasms. If
Yeah.
anything, it showed that he's healthy and he can be what teams need him to be in the playoffs. And remember, he single-handedly won the Carolina series for them. The
Yes, he
Rangers
did.
were going to lose 4
Mhm.
games in a row. They were.
I don't disagree.
Yeah,
Kreider took
true.
them on his back and said, "Screw this. I'm not letting this happen on my watch." Natural hat trick in the third period to win this series. If the Rangers beat Florida and wound up beating Edmonton, we're talking about him along the same lines of Messier.
100%. Yeah, and no doubt, and it still is like an all-time Ranger moment. Like it is. It's something we will all remember. It's something that should be shown on highlight films forever. It was that big, that significant, that and you're not overstating it, Dave. Like they were going to lose that series. I don't think there's a Ranger fan out there that could look you in the eye and promise they're telling the truth and say like, oh no, they would have won Game 7. Like no way. Not
No,
coming
they
off
would
3
not
straight
have.
losses. No.
They would have lost Game 7 the way they beat Carolina in Game 7, 2022.
Right.
Mhm.
Right.
5-1, 5-1,
Yep.
6-1, whatever that score was.
Yeah.
They
It
were
was like,
not winning that series.
no. And he is a big, like he does know how to play. And I think like, I don't want to confuse like there's a difference between like calling a guy clutch because he happens to score a couple of goals. Like, the way, I'm trying to think of some of like these guys who
The
have
way
popped
Chris
up in-
Kreider does.
No,
Chris
well,
Kreider scores I did this offseason thing. It was like the best Rangers playoff moment of the recent core. And Kreider had like half of the things listed.
right.
That's
But I think my larger point is that he also like knows how to play in these big games. Like he is generally, and look, he's had plenty of games where he's not had a major impact and people, there's lots of, vitriol online about the whole team, not showing up in a big spot when they do lose and fall short of the goal. But like, I think Kreider has so much experience in big games that does show up, and it enables him to score big goals and be that clutch performer. Like it's not just like, oh, he happens to have a couple of overtime winners, but like he's really not built for that type of game. Like he's clearly built for that style of hockey. So no, I couldn't agree more. The guy's, he's insanely clutch. I do think GMs probably value that or overvalue it to a certain extent. And it's a good point about his health. I'm really interested to see if he makes it into the lineup for the Four Nations final, because obviously he entered the tournament as the extra forward and only played in that Sweden game because of the injury to Matthew Tkachuk. So will he be in the lineup even as Team USA tries to get to full health? I think he deserves a spot, but that remains to be seen. All right, guys. Any final thoughts before we wrap?
I think the Rangers will be fine. I'm not too worried. I'm a natural optimist, so
Yes, you are.
I being a Mets fan does that to you. But I think the Rangers will be fine. We'll just have to wait and see. LGR.
I will say, Dave, I agree with you. Like, we will know if this game starts at 5:30 on Saturday. I think we'll know by about 7:00, about halfway through that game, if they're up for it the rest of this year. Like, I think the first period and a half will tell you a lot about where this team is at mentally and physically. So really interested to see how they start that Buffalo game, because that is a game that if they are serious about, as you said, competing and contending, like come out and get a 2-0 lead right off the bat. Like, don't let a bad team like Buffalo dictate the play to you when the game means a lot more to you than it does to them.
Yep, and you took the words right out of my mouth. This is something that I forgot to mention before. It's not just about winning the games and getting the points. It's about how they're doing it.
Mm-hmm.
If they are doing their usual, relying on power play and goaltending and vibes that don't exist this year, and they're getting lucky, then no. They're not. Then we'll know, like you said, we'll know right off the bat that they don't have it. But if they come out and they start playing like they should be playing, even if the games are close because they're getting goal lead or they hit 18 posts in a period, whatever, we'll know based off how they look. Yeah, 7:00 on Saturday. The game's on Saturday, right?
Games on Saturday starts at 5:30. So we've got we have very unorthodox start times this weekend with 5:30 on Saturday, 3:30 on TNT Sunday, and then 7:30 Tuesday night on the island.
And I can't even watch the game on Saturday because of that. Because of that start time, I can't watch the game.
That is a tough start time for parents for sure.
Well, that and it's my wife's birthday. We're going to be in Queens with her family,
nice.
So it's great. We would normally leave around 7:15, let the youngest fall asleep in the car, transfer her to her crib, and then give the oldest milk in bed, and I'd be able to watch the second and the third period. 5:30 start time. I'm not even going to prioritize it because oh no, sorry, I have to put my wife first. Oh no, whatever shall I do? Oh no. But yeah, I'll be monitoring the group chat and I'll be monitoring Blue Sky just to get an idea of how it's looking. And I'll hopefully be able to watch the Sunday game.
And dispatches from JL in the stands.
Tough. Yeah, maybe we can find JL in the stands.
No doubt.
Hold up a sign that says trade Adam Fox. We'll find you.
Oh, jeez. I don't want to get killed now by my own fan base.
Apparently there's a vocal subset of fans that wants to trade him because reasons.
I'm sorry, that's just dumb. But anyways, that's another discussion for another podcast.
Yeah, I don't even think we're ever going to address that. That's not even worth addressing. All right, want to thank everybody for listening. Always a pleasure to join you all here on Live from the Blue Seats, and we'll see you next week.